Right now we have Jeremy Goldstein, who will be talking on IoT and the future of pen testing. So let's welcome him to the stage.
Cool. All right. Well, first I just want to thank everyone for coming along to the talk. Hopefully you'll all be able to take something away from it. So, of course, based on the title here, I'm going to be talking about the Internet of Things and how that plays into the future of pen testing and the security implications. So let's start off with an agenda as to what we'll be going over here. Of course, we have to have the obligatory who am I, so you all know who I am. Then we'll get into the background of the technology evolution and how that's affected pen testing. So a bit of a history of computing, so to speak. Then we'll look at where we're heading from now in the kind of short to medium term. And then take a bit of a deep dive into IoT and hardware hacking, of course, which should be the fun part. And then we'll take a bit of a big step back and discuss why this kind of matters at a high level to us, to society, to our industry, and some concluding thoughts as well. So we'll get into our obligatory who am I. So, as Sylvia said, I'm Jeremy Goldstein. I'm the head of security testing at TSS. TSS was formerly Datacom TSS. We've rebranded to TSS Cyber, and we provide managed security services, security consultancy, and red teaming and pen testing, which is what I lead a team for. Previous to that, I was the team lead of the KPN Red Team, which is effectively Telstra in the Netherlands, where I lived and worked for 3 years. And before that, I was the director of security testing at the tax office, who I'm sure everyone is somewhat familiar with. I've been in InfoSec for about 15 years, running technical teams for about 10 of those, and all focused around pen testing, incident response, threat intelligence. So let's go through a bit of a selective history of modern computing and how it's actually impacted pen testing. So I'm going to start with the humble PC. As a lot of you will probably know, PCs started in like homebrew computer clubs, over in America. This is a photo of Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs working on some of the original PCs. And they really started out in these enthusiast type of clubs and were kind of kit computers you'd put together and that kind of thing. But later on, with people like beautiful Bill Gates here, they started to gain traction in businesses, and they were no longer this hobbyist, like device that you'd put together. And so you had marketing like that, and Steve Ballmer. And with that kind of thing, it's like, how could businesses not grab these computers up and use them? So looking at what that kind of brought us, with PCs becoming pervasive in businesses, enterprises, that kind of thing, that brought about a lot of desktop applications that everyone would use to do their jobs. And from a pen testing perspective, this brought us, thick client pen testing. IDA, Ollie Debug, that kind of thing. After PCs started to become a bit more pervasive, networking started to rear its head to actually connect these computers together, and the internet, of course. And kind of, you'll see a similar theme here, at least with the way I see it, is that the internet also started out a bit less commercial. It was largely like academic, quite casual, bulletin board systems, that kind of thing, and military as well. And it wasn't until much later that businesses and enterprises started to adopt the internet. And that networking, that internet, that really brought us infrastructure pen testing. So there's some pretty common tools there that a lot of you would be very familiar with. From the internet, moving on from bulletin board systems and those kind of things, we had websites and web applications. And again, they started out very, very casual and consumer-oriented. So some of you might recognize some of these style of GeoCities web pages, which were all the hotness back in the day. There was, of course, pornography and, those kind of bits and pieces on the internet, but businesses didn't really adopt it until it became way more pervasive. And now I think you'd all agree that it's pretty rare for a company or a business not to have some kind of internet presence. And so, this rise of web apps, websites, that kind of thing, brought us web application pen testing, which most people are pretty familiar with. The next major iteration that I saw was the rise of the smartphones and apps. But again, we had this really consumer slant to them. So I remember buying my first iPhone, the only iPhone I ever bought as well, by the way. And the key selling point when it first got released was that I no longer had to have an iPod and a phone. It was one device. And that was the really cool kind of, I guess, consumer slant to this device, because the App Store didn't exist. It wasn't invented yet when the first iPhone was released. But of course, the App Store did get released, Android did their version, and then apps, just became so pervasive. But again, these apps had a very consumer slant to start with. The App Store was released in 2008, and by Christmas 2008, the #1 paid-for app on the App Store was a fart app. Literally, you press a button and it farts. And I read that apparently the author of this fart app made up to $10,000 in a day at times through sales of it. So it just goes to show how consumer apps were. But now, of course, you do all your banking on your phone, two-factor authentication tokens, all sorts of business productivity, enterprise-type apps. And that has brought us mobile app pen testing. Next major iteration, the almighty cloud. This is a little bit different, but I still really see it as a consumer slant to start with. From what I saw, the early adopters of the cloud were really your consumer-facing apps, Instagram, Dropbox, that kind of thing. And it wasn't until later that your governments, your businesses, your enterprises started adopting cloud. And in similar vein now, it's unusual when you're assessing a system in some way, shape, or form that it won't have at least some component in the cloud, or maybe just cloud first and everything's there. And I'm sure some pen testers in the audience can attest to this. When you're assessing a cloud environment, it means you go to flaws.cloud and flaws2.cloud now and read through them to make sure that you actually remember all the different misconfigurations and things you need to check out for. So we've had this brief history of where we've come from. From a penetration testing perspective, web applications are generally the lion's share. Infrastructure, of course, is there, external and internal. Mobile apps and the cloud is really involved in almost everything that we do these days. But let's now have a look at where we're heading. So really, I see two major trends. And I'm talking, as I mentioned, the kind of shorter to medium term. We had the excellent keynote on day one about quantum computing and how that is coming. But I'm talking more in the kind of shorter term than that and what we're going to be seeing in the next months and years from the perspective of security analysts, pen testers, that kind of thing. And there's really two main trends that I see, and that is cloud computing continuing, and of course, obviously the talks about the Internet of Things, the Internet of Things. So before we move into more of the details of the Internet of Things, I'll briefly touch on cloud computing, which everyone's fairly familiar with, but there's some, I guess, changes that are going there with the abstraction away from traditional computing that impact us as pen testers and security people. And I think like Lambda, serverless functions, that kind of thing are a really clean example of that, where you no longer have kind of almost any of that stack below it. You're just running code, in the cloud, and that's it. And there's been some really good talks and research in recent years on assessing, or on assessing those types of solutions. So we're not going to go into that at all, but one of the key points that I have with this evolution of cloud and how it affects us as security assessors, pen testers, that kind of thing, is I really see it as that kind of continuous education and improvement, and just kind of staying ahead of the curve and understanding how to test a Lambda function and reading up on it and then going and doing it and using those existing skill sets that you have. But IoT, on the other hand, I think is different. So at the moment, IoT is immature. To me, it feels like where apps were when the fart app was the big app of the year. It's full of fail. So here's an article about a smart security app that crashed. And it caused the customers to be locked inside and outside of their homes. And there are plenty more examples. This one also I thought was quite entertaining. It was a smart heater that failed off when the servers went down. So then you had people all over Twitter complaining about the fact that their homes were freezing because some back-end servers were not operating. And a special shout out to Internet of Shit Twitter account, because it's full of this kind of thing, and it's worth a scroll through. But this is going to change. Forbes here is pretty clear on what they're trying to say. IoT is going to be making its way into enterprises. It's going to start being adopted more. Forget about the number, but it's a clear signal, I think. And another example, a little closer to home. This is actually, I thought this I was able to extrapolate out my point very well out of this. So the article on the left is actually an article that was placed on November 30, so about 3.5 months ago. It's in the Technology and Innovation IoT section of this Telstra Exchange blog, I think it is. Then only a couple of weeks ago, I found this one on the right. Same kind of topic, talking about IoT adoption at Telstra. But what I thought was interesting is it's actually in the business and enterprise section of their blog. So I thought it just made that nice transition, showing how things go from consumer land into business and enterprise land. And based on these trends that I've discussed so far, and given IoT's current trajectory, I believe it's only a matter of time until it makes its way into businesses and enterprises in a meaningful way. And I was hoping to find someone more important than I who had said something similar to that, but I couldn't find it, so I'm quoting myself. Don't know if you're allowed to do that. All right, so up until now, we've really just laid the foundation of why I see IoT adoption increasing, and that it will actually make its way into enterprises, and we'll start seeing it. So what's the big deal about IoT pen testing? I mean, it's already being done. People do it. But what's the big deal about it becoming more common? Why is it any more important than any other buzzword that we have around, big data, AI, ML, data lakes, whatever you want to call them? And for me, there's one word that differentiates IoT to traditional solutions, and that's hardware. Hardware presents a whole new world for pen testers, and a whole new playground as well. It has a different threat model, attack surface. You need different technical and even physical skills when you're soldering and things like that, which I've been traditionally terrible at. And so this is a real change, and a real change of direction from all of us who just play in the software world most of the time. And to go on a small little anecdote, when I moved to Amsterdam in 2015 to run the KPN Red team there, I had never touched hardware before in this way. And I got there, and there were a lot of guys in the team that were really enthusiastic about hardware hacking, and I just didn't get it. They'd show me getting like a UART, a serial shell on a router, and a root shell, and I'd kind of think, yeah, that's cool, but what can you do with it? Isn't it more effective if you're able to access the web interface or whatever? And it wasn't until I started seeing them actually, going and extracting firmware off those devices and finding buffer overflow exploits on services running on the devices, because they could actually analyze the code, or getting credentials out of the devices through hardware hacking techniques, or even getting the web source code off the web interface off them, and finding like remote command injection as root on these web interfaces because they were using hardware techniques. And that's what started to really turn me around, and I started to see the value in testing these solutions in that way. So, all of that really sets up my premise about hardware hacking and, testing IT solutions being part of our InfoSec future. So let's start to move into, what I call the fun part, and talk about IoT and hardware hacking. But, first, a couple of little housekeeping items that I think are quite important. What we're discussing here and going through is IoT and hardware solution pen testing. And that's a key differentiator I want to, you'll hear me mention a lot of times. Because when you have this shiny device, this IoT device or sensor or whatever it is, it should really be part of a solution. It should achieve something. It shouldn't just be a shiny piece of hardware for the sake of it. And when you're, say, a pen tester, you should be assessing this as a whole solution, and how it actually interacts in an ecosystem and what it achieves for the business or whoever you're testing for. Another key point is that it's not hardware hacking research that I'm talking about here. So this was a point that, as you saw in my bio, I've been pen testing for a lot of years, but it took me a lot of years to realize the difference between security researchers and pen testers. Because I feel like with our mandatory imposter syndrome that we all get to wear and carry with us, you'll see someone like a Charlie Miller hack a Jeep, or something like that, and then you think about your pen test that you're doing day to day, and you feel like, well, I couldn't do that on my 2-week engagement. And I certainly found it was lost on me the fact that there's months and months of research spent on single point solutions in order to discover these amazing vulnerabilities that help move the industry forward. So, similar, there's some amazing hardware hacking things that can be done, but I won't be discussing those. I'll be talking about really, what you can actually reasonably achieve within the normal time and budget constraints that you have as a pen tester. So I also want to talk about what a hardware pen test isn't and highlight a few pieces. So I did ask Silvio if I could put this up, and he said yes, so that's okay. But this is our BSides organizer, Silvio. This is a YouTube video where he's using dangerous chemicals to try and decap a chip in his own backyard, I believe. And that's really cool, and that's a genuine attack against hardware. Because you can decap a chip and take off all the teeny tiny layers using crazy chemicals or lasers or focused ion beams, whatever they are. And then you can actually zoom in and see the circuitry using like a crazy microscope or something, and start to reverse engineer the actual physical connections on a tiny integrated circuit. But doing these kind of attacks effectively can take months and months of time. And there's a very good French researcher, Olivier Thomas, who does this kind of work, has a company that does it. And I saw a presentation from him last year where he talked about how much the price is coming down on this. But it's coming down from millions of dollars to hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the time frames are coming down from a year to months. But it's not going to be an effective attack when you've got a whole solution to assess in a couple of weeks or something like that. So with that out of the way, with talking about what a hardware pen test is, I'm going to be going through two real-world examples, a personal safety device and an electrocardiogram test solution. So for those of you who don't know, because I certainly didn't and forgot many times while testing as well, an ECG is basically a heart test that you do with sensors on your heart to detect if you have potential problems that your physician may need to address. But anyway, we'll be going through these two real-world examples, focusing primarily on the personal safety device. These are two penetration tests that I was part of, so they are real tests. And I also just wanted to kind of point out that I'll be going through these examples again. What you can reasonably do. It's not, of course, a training course in this time frame, so it won't be every possible attack vector and that kind of thing. So let's start with the personal safety device, which is one of these. They're a white label solution. You can get them off AliExpress. There's retailers in Australia that have them all around the world. Basically, the premise is that for elderly, at-risk individuals, people who are doing outdoor extreme sports, people traveling, that kind of thing, you can use this to effectively press the SOS button, and it'll send your location and the SOS message to your contacts that you've mentioned or listed, and it will also initiate a phone call on your behalf to them as well if needed. It also has fall detection, which I believe the idea is if you're an elderly person and you fall over and don't get up again, that the device should then alert your emergency contacts that something's probably gone wrong. And it can also be used for geofencing, which to me seemed a little more creepy, but wasn't part of this solution. But there's that word again, solution. So we need to assess this as part of a solution. It's not just a little device. In order to kind of, visualize this solution, I thought I'd draw a very slick, high-end diagram for you that's definitely not done in Paintbrush. So everyone can actually see and understand what we're talking about and kind of use it to help, I guess, threat model and visualize what we're looking at. So we have our user in the kind of middle bottom there. They have the SOS device on them. They also have a companion app in both Android and iOS that was part of the solution to be tested. There's a web server. They can log into a website and also set their contacts that way. The mobile app talks to the web server. And the device itself apparently talked to some cloud somewhere that we had no idea anything about. But we'll work from there, and that cloud somewhere would alert the friend, the happy friend that they need help or anything like that. So when we started testing this solution, we actually started looking at the Android app, the website, those kind of components, because they're obviously important, and we thought they'd be the easy win as well. But there was really nothing interesting. So the Android app, nothing. Website, pretty much nothing. Comms, nothing of interest. That cloud somewhere, no idea where it was. So that's nice, because we're here to talk about hardware, so we get to jump into the hardware device now. So one of the first things when you're analyzing a piece of hardware is you want to analyze the attack surface. You want to understand what functionality that device actually has. Does it have Wi-Fi? Does it have Ethernet? Does it have an SD card? all of those kind of things, because that'll really influence what kind of testing you'll actually do. If it's got Wi-Fi, you'll probably hook it up to your access point and try and view the traffic. If it's got USB, you'll probably look at USB-oriented attacks. And you can get this information from the manual, from marketing material, data sheets. It's normally readily available because, of course, someone's normally trying to sell a product and they want to speak to the benefits of it. So, as I said, we'll be running through our example here. So with our SOS device, analysing the functionality it had a 3G GSM module on it, had GPS, of course, for location, had a micro USB port, had some charging ports at the bottom, which were just charging pins for a cradle, and an accelerometer to do the fall detection, basically. So that's good, we know that about it. The next thing, really, once you kind of understand what your device does, is to try the easy stuff first. So even though you're looking at a bit of hardware, it doesn't mean you have to do invasive level attacks straight away. You might be able to just remove the SD card out of it, stick it in your computer, and have full access to the root file system and passwords. You should try to telnet to it with default credentials. Mirai botnet certainly proved that can be pretty effective. So there's a whole bunch of simple things that you want to try before actually going deep, especially on a pen test. So for our device, 3G is a bit complicated. We'll get to that later. GPS, not that interesting. Accelerometer, very uninteresting. The micro USB port really was the only kind of easy access for us. But it turned out to just be charging. So we had no easy roads, basically. So once we've gone through that, we're going to open up the device and actually look inside it. So to do this, you want screwdrivers, sharp tools, things like that to be able to actually crack open a device and get into it. And it can be difficult sometimes. Other times it can be very easy. You want to be wary of tamper switches as well here, which can bite you. So with our SOS device, it was actually designed to be unscrewed, which was really nice because you had to put a SIM card in it. So that made it really easy. And when I pulled it apart and started looking at it, I was also happy to see it didn't have a tamper switch at all. And we tested, and we're trying to assess it. And after a while, I was realizing that one particular portion of it wasn't working right, just wasn't phoning home at all. And I was asking my colleague if he was having these problems, and he said no. And then he asked me, have you got the tamper switch down? I said, what do you mean there's no tamper switch on this? And he said, no, see that very obvious button right there? If you push it down, the tamper detection goes off. So I very embarrassingly then went back and pushed the button down and everything worked perfectly. So it is really important to check for those tamper detections. Once you've got it open and operating and that kind of thing, you want to identify what's on the board there. What are the chips? How do they communicate with each other? What do the lines look like? Are there any debug ports there? But probably the most important step in here is reading data sheets. So I've personally bricked multiple devices because I haven't paid enough attention to the data sheets and what different pins are and different chips are and that kind of thing. Yeah, it is really important to actually read them. So with our example, this is the actual board. Highlighted in green there is an ARM STM32 processor. In red is like a flash EEPROM style storage chip, basically. And no real debug ports were found there. You'd also probably can see that where the SIM card clearly goes, and on the other side of the board is the baseband chip with a bit of a cover on it. Yeah, no real debug ports, which was going to be one of our first goes at it. Some people with a keen eye might be able to see that there's some JTAG looking ports, maybe some UART ones that are just exposed pads. But in our testing, we just found they were not working at all, and maybe a chip had been removed or something. But I do want to have a quick tangent on debug ports because they can often be one of the first avenues of attack on a hardware device. So because that last device didn't have any obvious debug ports, I went to my garage and found a 3G router I had lying around, opened it up, and lo and behold, as is highlighted on the picture there, there's two ports that look very much like UART and one that looks very much like JTAG. So I wanted to kind of demonstrate what they can look like, but there is no standard for them. So it's just indicative, but you kind of want to look for things that look a bit like it. Once you've found it, things like the venerable multimeter will help you actually assess whether they're live, whether they're power, whether they're ground, that kind of thing. If it's JTAG, something like a JTagulator can help you interact with it. UART, you might just have a USB TTL, like a USB serial adapter. But I also want to actually do a special mention to last year's BSides badge, the bus side, which is actually a serial, like a UART adapter, and it also does JTAG detection as well. So I thought that was really cool that I actually got a badge last year that I can actually use on engagements now. But I also wanted to point out that just like in traditional pen testing, creativity can really help. So those UART and JTAG ports I pointed out are effectively, most of the time, just basically a pinout that comes out and is traced along the board to the actual processor itself. So what this person's actually done is use some very fine handiwork and some micro soldering techniques to solder directly to the pins on the processor that happen to be JTAG because he's read the data sheet, and then he's able to interact with it directly even though there's no JTAG pinouts on the board. And we'll see a little bit more of that later on too. So now that we've had a quick diversion onto debug ports, I wanted to have a little review on where we're at and start to kind of hone in on attacking this device. Because we've got a bit of an idea of what the device's functionality and components, inputs and outputs, the internals, we've got a bit of an idea on, but we haven't really done much yet. So let's have a look at where we're at. So going back to our very high-end diagram, we've gotten rid of the mobile app and the web server, not much there. We started looking at the device, but we don't know what the firmware looks like on it. We don't know if there's any sensitive data stored on it either. And that's some cloud somewhere we have no idea about yet. We haven't seen how this device talks to it, so that whole communication streams is still very unknown. So with a bit of a kind of step back and looking at this, we can kind of threat model it a bit and actually work out what do we really want to attack here. And we have two main attacks that we want to do at this stage. And that is extract that firmware off that chip that we saw, see if there's any sensitive data, see what the firmware does to try and find other vulnerabilities in the solution, and also work out what that communications is and where that back-end cloud even is. So let's go through those attacks now. The first one, extracting the firmware and data. There's a whole bunch of ways to do that. Whatever works, works. Often you can just download it off the internet. You could probably, or sometimes you can just email the manufacturer and ask for it, using social engineering techniques. There's a whole bunch of ways. But for us, a lot of them weren't applicable. So desoldering the chip was the chosen solution for us. So going back to our board, we can see here the flash chip highlighted. It's got the four kind of legs on each side, which are soldered to the board. So you need to get them off, but you can't just use brute force because you'll probably break something. So there's a few techniques to do this, but probably one of the neatest and easiest and quickest is to use a rework station. So on the left is a soldering iron and a hot air gun, commonly referred to as a rework station. So the black handle on the left actually has a tip at the end, and it will blow out hot air at 300 to 400 degrees Celsius. And what you effectively do is take that hot air, put it over the feet of the chip. It'll actually melt the solder, and then you grab some tweezers and just pluck the chip right off. So that's nice and easy, but then you've got a chip, and you need to read that chip, and of course you can't just stick it in a USB port because that would do God knows what. So you have a device programmer or a universal programmer, and that's what you can actually use to have an individual chip that's separated from a board. You effectively get that chip, stick it in the appropriate adapter, and then stick it in a device programmer like that one on the right, plug it into your computer, and then hope that you can just do auto-detect chip, download flash contents. And at least in my experience, luckily, that's almost always worked quite cleanly and easily. And if you've got an 8 meg flash chip and you go and use this technique, you'll have an 8 megabyte binary file sitting on your laptop, which is great. But then you need to analyze it. And it might be encrypted as well, so you need to work that out. For our example, luckily, it wasn't encrypted. It was actually the firmware, which means you've got to analyze this firmware now. And that's a whole discipline in and of itself. So what we can see here is actually a screenshot of the firmware in Radare. So, I mean, some of you may have noticed I am wearing a Radare shirt. I'm a little bit of a Radare fanboy. I thought of replacing this with Ghidra, given the hype around it, but I just couldn't do that because in order to get this to work, when we did the engagement, a colleague of mine did the reverse engineering, and he did it all in IDA Pro. And then, being the Radare fanboy I am, I thought, well, I'm going to do it in Radare now. And I loaded in Radare, and it completely failed. Not a single string, no cross-references, nothing. And I generally take the approach of, it's not Radare, it's me. It can do everything and I don't know how to do it. So I went very, very far down the rabbit hole and spent excessive amounts of time trying to work out why Radare couldn't analyze this firmware, to the point where I actually found that Radare's interpretation of a particular ARM instruction was incorrect, and I actually did a pull request and fixed the code in Radare so that it would actually analyze the code correctly. And then it all worked from there. So that was very much my not so humble brag, and the reason why I absolutely must have a Radare screenshot in here and nothing else, because it took a lot of effort to get it there. But back to the firmware disassembly. So we analyzed the firmware to see, what are the endpoints, where does it go to, is there any sensitive data there? And ultimately, we only had limited time. We couldn't find any endpoints, no IP addresses. We understood now that from the firmware that it only communicated over 3G. So that was going to be an important part. It all goes through the baseband, but still no endpoints that we could see, no sensitive data either. So we've effectively, kind of ticked that off in a way. We've learnt a bit more. Still, nothing very interesting. No nice vulnerabilities to write up except unencrypted firmware. So we really needed to see these communications between the device and the back end. And there's a couple of different ways you could do that. Like obviously, if there was Wi-Fi, you could do that. But in this case, we had 3G. So you can intercept the 3G over the airwaves. And another technique is what's called bus snooping, which we'll go into, where you actually intercept the communications on the board itself. And within 3G interception, there's a couple of different techniques that we'll quickly go over as well. But first, the equipment. If you want to do 3G interception, which is illegal, and we'll go over that more, so don't do it, you need to have a good quality SDR. But this goes for any other kind of radio analysis of more proprietary protocols. So this is a picture of a USRP, which is generally considered to be one of the best SDRs there are. And when you're doing something as high bandwidth as a 3G, 4G connection, you need something that's full duplex, so like a hack RF won't cut it. And you need to be able to have that bandwidth go through there. And you'll likely need test SIM cards as well. So IMSI caching, or IMSI caching, is a technique mostly used by law enforcement, which has a whole bunch of steps. There's specialized devices you can buy online to do it. But look, the real takeaway for IMSI caching is that it's illegal. So in this case, in this engagement, we knew that this was theoretically an option, but we weren't going to go and do it. The next option, though, also illegal. But this one, in this case, we were in a telecommunications provider, and we had the appropriate authorizations to stand up an appropriately named test 3G network. So we actually could do this attack. But you need to have the appropriate approvals, and it depends on the country and that kind of thing as well. But basically, you need to set up a test 3G network using your SDR and software like OpenBTS or YateBTS. You need a SIM card programmed for it. There's a lot of buggy instructions that are out of date and don't work, and a bit of prayer involved and whatnot. But ultimately, we had these test SIM cards. We stuck them in our SOS devices, and they would never, ever connect to our base station. It just absolutely failed. We tried a lot of different things, but at the end, we just had to, put a pin in it and say, we're going to leave that one. It's not working for us. It's, too complicated. We don't know why it's not working. So we moved on. And that led us to bus snooping. So bus snooping is the easiest way I can describe it is it's like Wireshark for electrical signals. So basically, you are trying to sniff and analyze and decode the signals, the actual electrical signals that are traversing along a board. So let's look at our device again and how we're going to theoretically do this. In green, again, we have our ARM CPU. And in red is the SIM card slot, which, as I said, has the baseband processor underneath it. Now, based on our firmware analysis and datasheet analysis as well, we basically figured out that that ARM CPU, through some of its serial pins, is going to instruct the baseband processor to talk to the internet, to talk to that back-end server. So therefore, between those two, there must be something interesting there. But in order to do that, you can't just load up Wireshark, of course. And the tool you need is a logic analyzer. So this is a Soleil, which is an example of a logic analyzer. Again, generally considered to be one of the better ones. You basically need to connect it up, and it will analyze the signals. So we've got this theory now of how we think we can really break in and understand how it communicates. So let's put this into practice. So this is a picture of, similar to what we saw earlier, some very skillful soldering, which was absolutely not done by me. It was done by a much more skilled solderer in my team. But basically, we worked out, as I said, where the serial pins were that might communicate with the baseband processor, soldered onto those pins so that, and glued it on as well so that it wouldn't keep breaking like it initially did. Then we hooked that up to the Soleil, and then hook the Soleil up to the laptop, and start decoding signals across the wire. Now, I don't expect everyone to be able to see the details here. The only thing I expect you to see is that there's an up and down going along there. And that is actually the signal on the wire being captured by the Soleil. And when we actually looked at what this one was, it interpreted out to this. Now, some of you, maybe some of the older people in the room, might recognize what this is. This is actually a modem command. So the AT series of commands are the protocol to communicate with a modem. It actually stands for attention, which I didn't know. So it's like, attention, do this. And this is what we saw. So we saw now we were really looking at what this processor was telling the baseband. This was a completely benign instruction that doesn't make sense to me no matter how many times I read it, but we knew we were in the right spot. So it was a case then of doing more captures, getting the device to do something and seeing what actually happens. And this was the interesting sequence that we saw. So this first AT command, the CIP status, is basically asking the baseband, are you connected to the internet? And the baseband says, yes. Yes, I'm connected to the internet, which is cool. Then it says, all right, great, you've got a connection. Can you connect to this custom access point name for me? The username and password are in between those quotes, so blank, but still connect to this custom APN. And it says, OK, done. So we're now connected up to where we need to be. Then it says, can you please start a TCP connection to, in this case, hidden.server.com on port 50,138. And at this stage, we're getting pretty happy. We're seeing a TCP connection going out to our backend server, along the wire here, right on the board. And then our next one is it sending data over that TCP socket, actually communicating with the backend. So at this stage, this is pretty much how we felt. We were quite excited about this, and we really had kind of cracked in there, and we were right where we wanted to be. But we still need to understand what these communications were, because this is the string that got sent. And when you first look at that, it's kind of not much. But because we'd been analyzing this solution a lot, it quickly stood out to us that those numbers in red, which are changed, but those numbers in red are actually the IMSI number, the unique identifier of the device, because everything with a SIM card, baseband, has an IMSI number. So we realized that the protocol in this case was just !1, comma, IMSI, and then semicolon, and then hex value 1A. But the beautiful part about this is it's actually the login request to the backend server. And some of you might have noticed that it's missing a factor of authentication, just any factor of authentication. It's pretty much just saying, here's me, and the server says, great, come on in, tell me where you are, send some SOS alerts, whatever you want to do. So then we were just able to rip that out, stick it in a Python script, and actually interact with that backend server, which was great. We've really gotten onto something there. So what do we have? So obviously there's no authentication. You just need to know the IMSI number. But you saw the IMSI number is pretty big. That's a fairly big key space. But after 5 minutes of research, we quickly realized that an IMSI number is not unlike a MAC address. It has kind of an organizational part, a few components to it. But in the solution, there was 6 digits that actually reflected the unique identifier of these devices. So it was a really small key space. So that's great. You could probably brute force it. But to make it even easier, the server also responded nicely and told you if that IMSI existed in the system. So we were now able to enumerate every device in this solution and log in and be them and spoof location data and SOS messages and that kind of thing. So we'd really broken the system at this stage. But how bad is this? And we were just kind of happy because we'd done the technical hacks and that was cool. But we started discussing it and we realized, well, an attacker could actually go and basically spoof the location data of every single user and send out constant SOS alerts to all their contacts all the time. And that would completely undermine the solution and they'd all throw it in the bin and the company would go bankrupt. So that's pretty bad. But we also realized that it could be worse, and it's a bit of a long shot, but we realized that you could actually spoof location data for a user, and if that user actually was in a life-threatening situation and their SOS alert went out, it would go to the wrong location that you've sent, and they could actually die. So, that's very morbid, of course, but, that was like our worst case scenario, and it's not very usual or normal when you're pen testing a solution that can kind of breach out into that human layer and have impact like that. So, because I put so much effort into these diagrams, let's revisit it one more time and just see what we've done here. So we've got our stock photo hardware hacker who's used his chisel and hammer to basically hack the device, work out how it communicates with that back end, completely compromise the back end of the solution, and our poor user is not doing too well. And for those of you with better eyesight, the friend is also a frowny face now. So not a very good situation. So look, that's the meaty one that I wanted to go through. But as I keep talking about the word testing the solution, I want to go over this ECG, this electrocardiogram example as well. So let's start with what it is. And before we get into this, I'd just like to point out that no hearts are exploded or anything like that. This is not that bad, kind of. So basically, this ECG solution is effectively, as I think I mentioned, normally you need like 12 leads, giant machine, a physician, all done very properly. This was some kind of medical breakthrough where people can actually plug a dongle into their iPhone, attach 4 leads themselves, and take accurate measurements and then see the results straight away and share it with their doctor. So that was pretty cool. It was a really interesting solution, like actually improving people's lives who might have heart problems and that kind of thing. Again, it's part of a solution though, so we need to analyze it in that way. So we have a user there with a very well-drawn heart, and they use this mobile app with the dongle attached to it. The mobile app talks to the web server, and we have a doctor there who also logs into that web server to see the results of the ECG. So let's go and actually assess this solution quickly. So we started out with the hardware because it was shiny and groundbreaking and all of that. And look, I hate to tell it, but there's nothing interesting there at all. It literally just took these signals off the user's chest, converted them to digital, and then the app itself basically interpreted them to get results. So it really wasn't very interesting at all. So we moved on to the app. And again, really nothing very interesting. But meanwhile, the website itself, and this is where I'm talking about the actual, assessing the whole solution, it was vulnerable to good old-fashioned SQL injection. So we had our shiny little device, but meanwhile, the website, complete SQL injection, which actually affected every single user on the platform. And this is obviously medical data here. So with this SQL injection, you could extract all the user's medical data. You could also modify all the user's medical data or delete the user's medical data. And similar to the last story, we had a nice moment of, hey, that's cool, but surprising. It's such a well-known vulnerability, and people know how to mitigate this, and this is a new system. It shouldn't really have these kind of vulnerabilities if they just had a better framework. Blah blah blah. But we again realized that with our more morbid hats on, that if someone's actually testing themselves because they have a genuine medical need to, they're uploading their results to share with their doctor, and meanwhile some not so nice person is performing SQL injection and removing those results, that person may never seek that medical attention that they need because their doctor will never see it. So that's obviously not very good, and the reason why I'm talking about this one is just to really drive home that point of it's the whole solution that matters, and even kind of more boring parts or parts that you think could be tried and tested and stuff like that, can really matter when it comes to assessing the whole solution. So we've gone over our examples at the moment, and now I want to take a bit of a step back and look at why this matters. So I think I've demonstrated pretty clearly that the security of IoT solutions can impact lives and information and all of those kind of things. So I think that's a given. But there's also more to it as I see it. So this is an article, again from Forbes, discussing a startup in Israel that basically got a nice bit of funding with no other purpose other than to hack IoT devices for governments. So, like it or not, IoT, pretty much is, but, is going to be a target going forward and needs to have some level of security. And there are other companies as well like this that are basically set up to, do lab research on IoT devices, but effectively to help people hack them. Another point that I wanted to raise is this Bain Company article basically makes it quite clear that they, at least to their belief, that if IoT security were to actually improve, enterprises and businesses would actually start to adopt it a lot more, and that they claim it's the key to actually unlocking these IoT solutions and having them come out into the enterprise. And I really think that's where we come in. So educating decision makers and solution designers with the issues at hand. Providing our expert guidance and advice, and I hope some of you can take some of these, even these low-level lessons that if you have this black box of hardware, it could actually be quite dangerous or could undo a whole solution, and it's not just to be considered that's just a black box, it's fine. And obviously pen testing IT solutions, of course, maybe I'm biased, but I think that's also a really critical step to knowing if they're secure or not. And given that I've talked about, basically analyzing right at that chip layer, all the way back to that cloud backend, web apps, mobile apps, all of that. I actually, decided to steal a very kind of hipster term from developers. And I found that no one else was using this online, at least on my very rudimentary Googling of it. So I'm going to coin the term now, Fullstack Pentesters, which some of you may have vomited a little bit in your mouth then when I said that, because it is a buzzword, don't get me wrong. But I do think it actually somewhat correctly encompasses the fact that, going forward, being able to actually go right from that chip, the communications on the board, through to the mobile app, through to the wireless communications, through to the servers and the cloud backends, is going to be really important. So on that, lovely note of full stack pen testers, let's start to wrap up. So I wanted to have some parting thoughts. So, I think, like it or not, IoT is coming. I think if you're procuring or delivering these devices, you need to be considering these kinds of risks and these security issues. If you're a product decision maker, I think you're going to want to get these solutions tested, because you could be putting something out in the market that, could cause serious issues for real people. And as one of my last parting thoughts, I think I've shown that during a traditional pen test time frame, you can actually successfully find and exploit serious vulnerabilities in an IoT solution, using hardware hacking techniques. But what we need is more skills in this area. And this is somewhere where, if you want to be that hardware hacker up there on the screen, we need to be skilling up as an industry. So in my experience, living and working in Europe, seeing some of the US trainers as well, I feel like Australia's lagging behind a little bit when it comes to hardware hacking skills. Don't get me wrong, there's people with skills, there's interest, a lot of it's there, but I just don't see it to the same level as what I did overseas. And to give you an example, in the Netherlands, there's actually a security conference called Hardware I/O. It's been running for about 4 years, and it has about 5 or 6 training courses associated with it and it's just a complete conference dedicated to hardware security. And I just don't see that here in Australia. Last year's technical keynote, for those of you who are here and remember, Joe Fitzpatrick, who's an amazing hardware hacker, he actually is part of a company called HardwareSecurity.Training, who provide very high quality, high-end hardware hacking training all around Europe and the US. But again, not here in Australia. But as I said, the interest is here. All is not lost. We have actually people like Silvio, who has a, well, I describe it as an intro to hardware hacking course. I think Silvio calls it interfacing with IoT devices. So there is actually ways to get those skills here. So what I really want to kind of leave you with is, if this has piqued your interest, I recommend, go to the Hardware Hacking Village, talk to people who've done this kind of thing, take Silvio's class, watch YouTube videos and actually learn how to do these techniques, because they are within reach. And let's skill up and let's help improve the security of IoT solutions together. Thank you.